Now here's what I'm going to do. We're going to play a little game. It's afternoon. We ought to play a little, don't you think? Yeah. When you go to school, you get recess. This is as close as you're going to get, okay? Because I'm not a play director, so. All right. Here is sort of 100% slow and 0% fast, all right? Right in front of my podium, 50-50. This is also known as the no raise hand zone. So there will be a forced choice. You've got to choose if you're going to raise it, if it's close to the middle, are you raising it before, so it's more slow than fast, or are you raising it after, so it's more fast than slow? And when I get down here, now we're going to be at 100% fast. Very few churches are going to be at either end. Okay? So here's what I want you to do. As I move through, where you believe you and your church would be in terms of the pace of change, you're going to stick your hand up and keep it up until we get all the way through and we have everybody's hand up. Okay? Are you ready? You got in mind where you're going to raise your hand? Get it in mind. The faster you raise your hand, the faster the pace. That's pretty simple, right? All right. So we're slow. We're still slow. I see a few hands go up. We're still pretty slow yet. We're not even about 75% slow, 25% fast. We're closing in. We're pushing somewhere in the neighborhood of near half. Now, last chance, stick your hand up if you're on this side. All right. Now, of the folks who have your hands up, how many of you, put those down, how many of you just had your hands up and you're in a church of under 100 or less in worship? Most of you. How many of you that, put them down, how many of you that had your hands up so far are larger than 100 in worship? A few. How many of you that have your hands up that are larger than 100, you're more than 150 in worship? Very few. So that, you know, that's pretty likely. And there'll be some churches that are larger that because of the circumstance are going to be more on the slow side. Okay? Okay, we cross over now. How many, everybody had their hand up before over there. Get your hand back up again. How many of you now, you're raising your hand now. Okay, we're moving a little farther over. We're closing in on 75%. Oh, nice, you got your hand up. I'll talk to you later. You had your hand up, that's good. How many still not hand up? How many yet? We're moving toward 80. We're pushing toward 90. 95. Philip, I'm looking at you, buddy. Everybody votes. He's going, who, me? Yeah. You got Philip on your name tag, dude. Okay. You may not be Philip, but that's on your name tag. All right. Too late, man. It's now in here. You can throw that sucker away, and I got your name. Put them down. Now again, what's key is to be able to articulate in conversation back home with the rest of your pastor parish committees, you share this, not only where you believe you are and what that looks like, but the key thing you've got to clarify is why you think that pace of change. What factors lead you to that? Because that's the key. Now, are you always going to be right on the money? No. See, you as a pastor parish committee, you're like the thermostat of a house. You're the feedback loop. So you're setting the temperature. Here's where we believe the pace of change needs to be. And what you're going to do is you're going to see, okay, how's that working? Well, it's not quite fast enough. You know, we're kind of dragging. I think we ought to pick it up a little bit. So now we have that conversation with the pastor. The pastor says, I think as I'm seeing things for these reasons, I think it needs to pick up a little in these ways. So we pick it up. Or, you know what? I don't think the congregation is ready for quite that fast a pace of change. I think we probably ought to dial it back just a bit. So you're constantly doing feedback and figuring out and testing and adjusting. So it's okay that you start at a certain pace, you continue to communicate, you give feedback, you discern, and as need be, you adjust. And you're not just going to do that the first year. No. If you're going to be effective in ministry, you're going to do that the whole time that you're together. You're constantly looking at what next, what do we need to change, what do we need to push forward, what do we need to dial back. That's a key role of the pastor parish or staff parish relations committee. They are absolutely and have been absolutely critical and key in my ministry to give me that kind of help and feedback. So I see them as a critical partner in figuring all this stuff out. We're good? All right, ready to move on? It don't matter, 3 o'clock's coming, so we're moving on. So. Ooh, I like this one. This one's fun. Let's talk about how to get acquainted well. Well, it's all fun, amen? Yeah, it's all fun. All right. Begin to communicate your plan to get acquainted with the congregation. Now, what that assumes a couple things. One, you got a plan. You need a plan to get acquainted. Just moseying around and bumping into folks and hoping it works out is probably what got you in trouble at the last parish. So get a plan. And that's not just the pastor, that's the pastor parish committee. Get a plan. Okay? And second of all, when you got a plan, don't keep it a secret. Communicate to the congregation so they know what you're doing and why you're doing it. This is an important one. Now, how you get communicated, how you get acquainted, going to be different based on the size. Now, you'll start by saying, here's how I'm going to get acquainted with the leaders. I'm going to meet with every leader, with every group in the church, with every ministry in the church. I'm going to have them tell me about their ministry and what they've been doing and what's been working and what they tried that didn't work and what have you been learning over the last couple of years. So my plan is, now if I'm on a faster pace, within the first month to 6 weeks, I'm going to get a read on the leaders and get acquainted. If I'm on a slower pace, I'll probably take 3-4 months or so to get through all the leaders. Okay? So again, the pace of change will impact the way you're going to get acquainted. Besides that, how am I going to get acquainted with the congregation? And, if married, how your spouse will be involved. Now, when I was at Auburn, we have 4 children, 3 still at home. And so, no, my wife was not significantly involved in all the get acquainted. Now, if I were doing it now with no kids in the house and we did that, yeah, my wife would go with me to most everything we did. So it isn't mandatory that the spouse has to be involved. You just have to, in your context and setting, if you're married, you got to figure out and let folks know how will your spouse be involved, if at all. Okay? So I'm just saying you need to communicate that, be clear with that. And this beginning of the communication is going to be with the pastor parish committee. So let's start with smaller churches. If I'm in a smaller church, under 100, what's the primary way I'm going to get acquainted? Home visits, visitation. Now, what role can the pastor parish committee play in this? And the answer is a huge one. And here's what I've learned over the years. You probably will find this as a shock. But on a Myers-Briggs personality indicator, I tend to be more on the extroverted side than I do the introverted side. Who knew, right? Yeah, who knew? Yeah. So I never thought in these terms. But recognizing that actually a majority of pastors are more introverted than they are extroverted. Now, introvert, extrovert doesn't mean I like people, I don't like people. Has nothing to do with that. It has to do with where you get your energy and where you expend your energy. If you're an extrovert and I come to a group like this, I am riding high for hours. I mean, the energy from the group just sets me soaring. Now, if I'm an introvert and I do this, I could also do this incredibly well. And a lot of introverts are amazing presenters and communicators. But that experience does what to them? It absolutely drains them. So they got to go recharge their batteries when they leave an experience like that. That's the difference between introvert and extrovert. So part of what I discovered with my brothers and sisters who are pastors who are introverted, making the home visits was great. They were outstanding. I loved making the home visit. That wasn't the rub. You know what was the stumbling block to them making the home visits? Setting them up with a phone call. That was the thing that was overwhelming. Talking to somebody on the phone, getting on and off the phone, doing the chit-chat with somebody I don't know. Now, going to the home and getting to know them, that's awesome. Making the phone call to arrange it, ooh. So, where are my pastor, parish staff, parish relations committee folks? That's your role. And so what you're going to do is you're going to organize the visits. And you'll have a sign-up sheet. You'll have a sign-up sheet, large kind of calendar deal, in which the pastor gives you the dates that the pastor is available for visiting and the time slots, and then you'll put that in the gathering space. And you're going to encourage people for a couple of, a month or so when they first come, sign up for a time. Now, the first groups I want on that chart before we give it to the rest of the church is whom? I want the staff parish committee and every member of the council to have already signed up their time. Because I don't want people to see these visits as remedial. Oh, these are the folks that are inactive. The pastor is going to go like the truant officer and get them to come back. No, I want folks to see this as this is for everybody. So if all the members of the staff parish committee and all the folks on the church council have signed up for their time, and then people look at that, they go, oh, look who all's going. Well, I want to make sure I get my time. See, leaders lead by modeling the behavior we want everybody else to follow. Okay, so we got our chart up. We got the times already signed in over the next, and in a small church, you could take 9 to 12 months. I took about 9-10 months to do all the visits. Okay, so I signed up the times, figured out the number of households, put up the slots. People signed up. Now, here's what we did. A staff parish committee member took a month. And so if in that month we still had slots available, there was a list of all the people who had not yet signed up because we had a master list, and when they signed up, we crossed them off the master list. And so let's say that Norma is on a pastor parish committee, and Norma's the person who has August. Okay? And August, we've got 3 openings yet. So Norma goes down the list, and she notices the Smiths and the Joneses and the Whites have not signed up. So she calls them up to get them recruited for their time. If they can't do it in August, then she looks to sign them up in September. But she keeps calling until she gets all those slots in August filled. Now, when the slots in August are filled, congratulations, Norma, you're done. Now, the pastor doesn't have to worry about making the phone calls. The pastor can just go, oh, I'm going to visit this family and this family at this time, and this is when I'm going, and life's good. Okay, so it's a team effort. We're good? Now, on that visit, typically, and not every visit can be a home visit, I get that. You're a pastor, woman, you're not going to a home with only a man in the house. Reverse that, the same thing will be true. So this visit may take place at a coffee shop, this may take place at the office, this may take place somewhere else within appropriate boundaries. So we always got to be aware of the boundaries. Okay? But if possible, I find it really helpful to do the visit in the home. We're clear? Yes? Yes, and I said and reverse. Yep, no problem. And the same thing in reverse, same thing. So you're not going to visit somebody of the other gender alone in their house. Now, what do we do when we get there? 45 minutes to an hour. I always announce it ahead. I'm going to ask questions like this. Well, tell me a little bit about your family. Tell me a little bit about where you work. How long have you lived in the area and the community? What ways are you involved in the life of the church? What do you believe this church does best? What's the biggest challenge this church faces in the next year or two? If you had a magic wand that could do a mid-sized miracle for the church, what would it be? Are you having trouble keeping up writing those? Check the questions at the bottom of the page. So in other words, I'm going to start with personal data. Tell me about your family, tell me about your work, tell me about how long you've lived in the community, tell me a little bit about how you're engaged and involved in the life of the church. Then I'm going to ask you some perspective questions about the church. What do you think this church does best? What's the biggest concern or opportunity of the church? If you had a wand, a magic wand that could do a mid-sized miracle, what would it be? How's this church helped you grow spiritually? Not simply how have you grown spiritually. How has this church helped you grow spiritually? And you know, if I don't get much response to that, it tells me a couple of things. One, it may be that you're not developing or growing or intentional about your spiritual life. Or second, it's telling me, and that's why I have to clarify, you may be growing spiritually, but where you're getting that potential for your growth is outside the church. You're not finding it here, so you're going somewhere else. What will be helpful for me to know about this church? So I'm just asking a lot of questions. Now, my goal, when I'm a pastor in a new appointment, I have a key significant goal in every church that I've gone to. And it's this goal. My goal is, at the end of being the pastor 1 year, that no other person in this church will know more about this church than I do. Now, it doesn't mean I'll know everything about this church. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be things I can still learn about this church. But what I'm saying is, at the end of the year, my intention, my goal, and I've never failed to reach it, is I know more about this church than any one other person. Because I've listened to lots of different people. I've asked all kinds of questions. I've tested and sifted and filtered what I'm hearing to get clarity. Because, see, here's my understanding. If I'm going to lead this church in the direction of the mission, I can't lead this church if I don't understand this church. If I don't understand this church, I'm not leading this church. I'm leading probably the church I had before that I'm still frustrated I didn't get a chance to get done what I didn't get done before. And I can't lead this church like I did the last church, because this church isn't the same as the last church. Guess what, lay people? This pastor ain't the same as your last pastor. So this pastor can't lead the way your last pastor did. Doesn't make it good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just true. And so therefore, if I'm going to lead this church, I got to understand this church, and that means I'm spending the first time asking lots of questions, listening, sifting, sorting, understanding the life of this church. So to me, getting acquainted is more than learning your name and a few things about yourself, so when I see you on Sunday morning, I can say something to you that connects with your experience. I want to be able to do that. That's important to me. But more than that, I'm getting acquainted with the church to understand this church, because I can't lead this church if I don't understand this church. How am I going to figure out if we're on a little faster pace And it's about identifying the right issues and discovering the right people to pull together to move the church in the right change to help the church accomplish the mission. How do I do that if I don't know the folks? How do I find out the right issues if I don't hear what folks are saying are the key issues? So, I told you before, how can I know how to lead, what the right issues are? The way I discover it early on, the listening visits in a small church. Because when I keep asking the same questions of everybody, you know, it isn't long till I start hearing a pattern. And I keep hearing the same kind of things, not maybe in every household, but over and over and over again. So when I come in, and we're now going to meet 9 months or so later in the spring, probably post-Easter, to begin to say, okay, let's talk about the direction of the future of the church. That's a slower pace. Here's what I'm learning. Here's what I'm hearing. Does this resonate with what you've heard in your experience? And folks are going, well, Doug, he's a genius. You know, he knows exactly where we need to go. Well, how do you ever figure that out? He listened. He asked. He clarified. It's not rocket science. So this getting acquainted is not only about building relationship, it's about getting clarity about the potential for future direction. Pretty slick, huh? See, I'm big on working smart, you know, getting 2 or 3 things done with one process. So not only get acquainted, build relationships, I also get clarity about direction and potential future. So that's small church. Question about that. Yes, I always close with prayer. No, the prayer is not a shut-eye ambush. Lord, thanks so much for visiting this person who hasn't been to church for 2 years. God, continue to stir in their heart the passion to finally come back home and to become active in the church they've been so neglectful of for the last 2 years.
There you go. That worked.
Why would I think that that happens in home visits? Because I hear it all the time in pastoral prayers at churches that are shut-eye sermons to jab people when they ain't looking. That's not prayer. That's blind sabotage. I'm going to hit you when you're not looking. So, no, you don't want that kind of prayer. You want affirming, uplifting, thankful, celebratory prayer. We're going to close with prayer. And I always ask, is there anything particular or special that you'd like for me to remember you today in prayer? So yeah, we're going to close in prayer. Now, following that visit, after I leave the driveway, after they're out of the office, I'm going to write like crazy. Because if I write during the time I'm there, where's my focus? And I'm missing half the communication, because half the communication is the body language. And if I'm looking at my paper writing, I'm missing half of what's being communicated when we're together. That's why I much prefer face-to-face over a phone call. Did you know that 7% of what you communicate is the content of your words? And see, email and text pick that up really well. 7%. 38% of what we communicate is our tone of voice. So the telephone augments that. But 100% total, 55% incrementally of what we communicate is through body language. And if I'm looking at my paper, I'm missing 55% of what's being communicated. So therefore, I'm not writing, I'm watching. So that's why I don't look at my notes a lot. Because I'm watching you folks all the time, right? I'm looking all over the room. Why? Because I'm getting a sense, is this connecting? Is this communicating? Is this making sense? Do I need to continue? Do I need to respond? And I'm getting that kind of feedback all the time. Watching If I'm stuck here just talking, then I'm oblivious to what you all are doing. And I can't really connect with you because I miss your communication with me. And the same thing's true in a one-on-one visit. So I'm going to schedule in my visit on my calendar an extra 15 minutes for writing time. So all the stuff I heard that's significant, I'm going to make sure I write down. That's the listening visit. Question? Way over here, yeah.
How long for a visit?
About 45 to 60 minutes. I usually shoot for 60, and I always announce ahead of time how long. Because if you tell people it's going to be 60 minutes, then they'll make sure at about 45 minutes. I usually say, now, we still got about 15 minutes. Is there anything else you want to make sure you share with me? I always aim to get my part done in 45 minutes. That gives them about 15 minutes to share what they want. If I don't tell them, then at the end of the hour, they go, oh, but I got so much I want to still say. So I guide it, and one of the ways I guide it is by putting a time parameter with it. But I do that with everything, right? At least when you've been around me, that's what I've done, and I'm pretty good with that all the time. I'll call my wife on the way home, said, when will you be home? Well, I'm thinking I'll be home about 32, 33 minutes. She's used to that. I mean, she doesn't go, just say a half an hour. No, I won't be there in a half an hour. It'll be 32, 33 minutes. Depending on what I get stopped at the traffic light at McGalliard coming in home, it'll be 32 to 33. So, I'm always conscious of that kind of stuff. All right, you ready to shift gears?
Yep.
Let's talk large church. Similar kind of process, but different. Large church. You connect with people in a small church one-on-one. You connect with people primarily in a large church by groups. People connect with each other by groups. So the primary way we're going to get acquainted in a large church is groups. So again, we're going to do the same kind of thing, but we're going to be in groups of about 15, 16 people. So, to set this up, again, we're going to have a sign-up sheet of coffees. Let's say that you've got about 300 folks in worship. Okay? You're not going to have 300 folks in worship means you probably got about 400 to 450 adults that are there about once a month. And for a lot of folks, if they're there once a month, they consider that to be pretty active. So you got about 400 to 450 folks. If you get most all of your leaders and half that number of folks to 2/3 that number of folks in a coffee, you're doing great. So we're going to shoot somewhere around 250 to 300 folks in a coffee if we're running about 300 or so in worship. Let's shoot for 250, all right? So at 15 folks per coffee, that means we're going to run somewhere around 17 coffees, somewhere in that range. Okay? So therefore, I want to get these done in about 3-4 months. I want to be wrapped up before Christmas. So I'm going to do typically about one a week. It's about a 45-minute gig. Now here's how those are, let's talk about the setup, all right? So we're going to list the days and the times. In a large church, most United Methodist churches, I'm going to set about 1/3 of those during the day. Why?
Because you have people that are retired or people that don't drive at night.
You got it. So about 1/3 of the folks are available during the day and really not available at night very easily. So I'm going to set 1/3 of these during the day. I'm going to set about 2/3 of these either on weekend, Sunday afternoon, or at night. So I got 17 of them, and we've got it set, and we've got up to 15 spaces for people to sign up. Now 16 is if you get to the last space and you've got 2 people that want to come, a couple that want to come, yeah, they can come. So that's 16. But our goal is to get 15 people at each coffee. So first group that I'm going to have sign up are leaders, staff parish, church council, whatever other groups you consider as your leaders, staff members. I want to make sure that all the leaders are signed up before we put that out for everybody else to sign up. We're going to take about a month for people to begin to sign up, encourage people to sign up. Same deal. You're in charge of, each staff parish member will take 2 of those coffees. So if it's, Bob, your turn to do this coffee to make sure it's filled, and we've got 12 people signed up, but we got 3 to 4 openings, Bob's going to look at the list of people who haven't come, who haven't signed up, who have come to worship at least once a month. I'm not interested in recruiting folks in a larger church who come to worship Christmas and Easter. I mean, if they want to sign up, I'm fine with that. But we're not going to go chase them down, track them down. So this is a list of folks who've been there on average once a month or more. So Bob's going to call, and he's going to call to see if he can get those 2 slots filled for the coffee that he's helping host or oversee. He's going to keep doing that until he gets those filled. If he calls someone, they can't come at that time, then he's going to call to get them filled for the next one, and the next one coming up until they say, yep, we could come in October. And then he makes the next phone call to fill it back up again in the one he has in August. Are you clear? Is that making sense? So you don't just call up and if they can't come, say, oh, I'm sorry, bye. And then somebody else trying to call them to fill another one. No, you call them, you try to get them filled, starting with the one that's that's nearest to today. And again, staff parish is taking responsibility to get those set up. We're good? We're clear? All right. So when you come, you got like 15, 16 people. Now, let's lay out the time frame of this. This could happen in a home. This could happen at the church, at parlor or whatever. So, you can be flexible. Every coffee also has a scribe. Because you see, when you come to the coffee, you're going to have newsprint and a scribe. So here's what happens. First 15 minutes when you come is basically light dessert and just share, Pastor, it's good to be here, and a little chit-chat and as people arrive. So 6:45 to 7, dessert. 7 o'clock we're going to start. From 7 to about 7:15, 7:20, brief introductions. Every person there has up to 1 minute to share a bit about themselves. Here's a bit about my family, here's where I work, here's how long we've been in town, and here are the 2 or 3 significant ways I'm involved in the life of this church. Don't give me a list of 27. 2 or 3 most significant ways. Okay? At the end of the minute, the next person till we go around. Last person, the pastor. Pastor shares a little about themselves, including their call to ministry. So about 4 to 5 minutes. We're good? All right. Now, the pastor is not feverishly writing all this stuff down. Why? Because every person, before they came to the coffee, was mailed a card to fill out all that information. Those cards are also available if they come to the coffee and forget their card. They don't leave the coffee till they fill out the card. So they can fill it out in advance, they can fill it out while they're there, but that way the pastor is not there feverishly trying to scratch out information, because again, I don't want your eyes on the card, I want your eyes on them. So they're filling out. Make sense? Okay. Well, that's pretty specific, yeah, because that way you aren't going to afterwards go, gee, I wish we would have done that. So I want to make sure we do this really well. Okay? Now we're into the 4 questions, and those are listed on your sheet. The first 2 questions, I want to hear from everybody. So we're just going to go around the horn, and the first person is going to be asked, so what does this church do well from your vantage point? And we're going to hear from all 15 people what the church does well. And the scribe, who is not participating that night, So that could be a leader, that could be a member of staff parish, that could be somebody recruited, but they're not one of the 15, 16, because you can't be the scribe and participate. So if you're a scribe one night, you're going to be at a meeting at the coffee to be a participant a different night. When you're scribing, you're just scribing. So each answer you're going to catch in brief what each person says, all the way down. And when we finish a question, then I, as the pastor, I'm going to turn to the group and say, any comment or observation you'd like to make about that list? Anything else that you think ought to go on that list? What do you notice as you look at that list? And I'll be happy to ask questions and make comments because I'm trying to learn as I'm hearing it. So it's going to take about 15, 20 minutes, somewhere in that neighborhood for this question. Then we're ready for the next question. What's the biggest challenge or opportunity facing this church in the next year or two? And again, I want to hear from every person a response. Now, some of the responses may be the same. Well, the biggest challenge we're facing is finance, or the biggest challenge we're facing is an aging congregation, or the biggest challenge that we face is a breaking down building with high maintenance costs. So you may hear that several times, but I want to make sure everybody responds. We're good? All right. Now the last two questions, I encourage everybody to respond, but everybody doesn't have to. Everybody has to respond to the first two questions. Third question. If you had a magic wand that could produce a mid-sized miracle for this church, what would it be? Now, why the term mid-size? I mean, have you ever found in the Bible that term, mid-sized miracle? I learned that question from Lyle Schaller, who celebrates his 90th birthday on Friday. And he's been a huge mentor to me in the work that I do. And I learned that question from him. So why mid-size? Why the qualifier mid-size? What does that do? It's attainable. It's possible. It's not kind of part the Red Sea stuff. That's interesting, but not really helpful because we're never going to do that. So what I'm going to get is your hopes and dreams that's going to take faith, will take God, will take effort, but it is possible. So that's why I like the mid-size piece. So what I get now is your hopes. First question, I get what you understand are your strengths. Second question, I get a chance to understand what you think are our biggest concerns or where we got to focus our energy for our future. Third question, I get a sense of where your hopes are or what you'd love to see. Fourth question, again, how has this church helped you grow spiritually? And I get a good sense of what's the spiritual barometer of the church and in what ways are we helping people develop and grow in their spiritual life. Typically, I'm all done. If I start at 6:45, I'm all done at 8:30. And then hang around, some conversation, some follow-up, etc. Now, Doug, why are we going to write all this stuff up? Because we have 17 coffees. We're going to do a compilation of results. So we're going to list, this was the frequent response of what this church does best is care. And we heard it at 16 out of the 17 coffees. I didn't say how many people, I counted by how many coffees. And the second most frequent was the care in the community. And the third is the music. And the fourth is and then we just put in parentheses the number of coffees where that was named. I get a really good snapshot of the perception of the church on a broad scale of what they see are the strengths and resources and assets of this church. Second question, what does that help me do when I've kind of compiled the results of the concerns, challenges, opportunities over the next 2 years?
Gives you a sense where to go.
I got a real clear picture of what are the issues, what are the right issues that we need to address. How did I know that? Because they told me. Well, what an amazing concept, to ask and listen to find out. Now, there may be things they're not aware of, and I understand that, and I'll discover that as I'm there. But when I'm trying to get started and move in the direction of change to build trust, I'm going to start with the things they identify that we can pretty easily and readily address, because if I do that, what's going to happen to the change in my pocket, to the trust that I have? Well, that's going up dramatically. So that's a huge asset for me as a pastor, to be able to understand where we dig in and start. And that I'm sharing with the whole congregation. 3-4 months in, we finished the coffees. Hopefully even pre-Christmas, November, we're going to have a day of reflection and planning with the leadership. Here's what our strengths are. Here's our assets. Here's our concerns and challenges. Here's our hopes and dreams. Where do you think what are the 1 or 2, 3 things we ought to focus on and really look to dig into in the next 3 to 6 months? So I'm not even deciding that alone. I'm taking the leadership to help me sort that out. But it isn't just about what George thinks or Mary Ann thinks. This is a reflection of what we've heard across the church. Because see, when you're in a group, and I don't know the group well, I don't know that, George every meeting says, we need to put a bell in the bell tower. That's his note that he bangs for everything he's worth. And every meeting does that. And I'm thinking he's speaking for a whole lot of people. No, he's just speaking for George. Now, when I list all the biggest challenges of the church, and we get down to the ones that just had one group, there's one group that said, put a bell in the bell tower. And in fact, there wasn't just one group, there was one person. And so therefore, I'm not giving it the same weight because I'm not hearing it broadly. Does that make sense? So I just find this process, again, it's a great way to get acquainted with folks, get to know folks, but it's also an amazing way to get some clarity about where to dig in and get started. Pastors who have used this have told me afterwards, you saved me at least 12 to 18 months of trying to figure out what's going on so I could figure out where I need to really start to make a difference. I got that within about 3 to 4 months. And the folks, not only did I get it, but when I share the results, everybody reads what the whole church is saying, so they're going, wow, 15 of the coffees said this is what we need to focus on. We ought to pay attention to that rather than ignore that or avoid that. We're good? All right. Let me give you about 5 minutes or so in your group. What kind of process and strategy are you going to use to get acquainted? What works in your context? I'm really clear that if we're a large church, we're going to get acquainted in coffees or groups. I'm really clear if we're a small church, we're going to do that in individual visits. But Doug, we're a mid-sized church. What do we do? Combination. Here's a kind of combination you could do. Schedule a visit with every person who's 65 years of age and older. Or 65 years of age and older, or retired. You're going to schedule a visit. You're going to offer to visit anybody else under 65. Most folks under 65 in a mid-sized church, they're not looking for you to come visit them. Therefore, everyone, including the folks over 65, you're going to do coffees to get acquainted with all the folks in the church, come into a group of 15. So that you primarily get feedback in coffees and everybody gets to hear everybody else, but you get that kind of one-on-one touch with the folks over 65. Why is it helpful and strategic to have those kind of personal visits with the folks 65 and older? Pardon?
Know the history.
They know the history. That's really helpful. And that's more likely an expectation of that group, that they would get to know the pastor. Because even if you're mid-sized, in a smaller mid-sized church, they still think of themselves as a small church, still have expectations of knowing the pastor like a small church, and therefore you begin to build some rapport and trust with those folks. And when it comes time to make a change, and the change needs to be made, and these folks have visited with you and talked with you and prayed with you, and you know their story, they're willing to trust you, even if it's not exactly what they'd like to do, because I built some relationships. So I'm putting change in my pocket to be able to enable and lead change.